Welcome back. I made a mistake at the very end of my last video and said that I had concluded my coverage of Learning Objective 9.4. Obviously, I had finished 9.3. In this video, I'll be covering Learning Objective 9.4, summarize the factors that determine whether individual and group conflict will escalate or be resolved for PSY 235 Social Psychology. Now, this part of the chapter, what you'll be looking at is how do people resolve conflicts, and what's the impact of being cooperative in resolving conflict. In groups or between groups, as is often the case, people often have goals that just don't fit. So when people have these incompatible goals, that can cause problems. That can put people into conflict with each other. This can be individuals who are in conflict with each other, groups who are in conflict with each other, companies in conflict with each other, or with other groups, or with individuals, even nations. You know, we're consumed by the news cycle right now, where people are trying to negotiate solutions to really, really painful conflicts between countries or between cultures. So the stakes are pretty high in some of these conflicts. The way this has been studied, and some of this research comes out of what's called behavioral economics, which is an interesting hybrid between economics and social psychology. Often researchers have posed what are called social dilemmas in order to understand how human beings make decisions in these kinds of moral conflict situations. Social dilemmas, as they're defined as conflicts in which the beneficial action for an individual may actually have harmful effects for others, for the group, for the whole. And the researchers want to know what kind of variables will move people from their individual concerns to focusing on the group, and vice versa. One of these dilemmas is something called the prisoner's dilemma. And the prisoner's dilemma, it's often in a research context presented as a game. And in fact, many of our games actually look like this when we play them. You have two people in the game, and they have to decide one of two options without knowing what the other person is going to choose. Now, this little video clip shows just someone making fun of the prisoner's dilemma.
Tell us what happened and we'll recommend the light sentence.
Nice try. But I happen to understand a little thing called the prisoner's dilemma.
Is that so?
You have no physical evidence of a crime, so you can only convict us if one of us rats out the others. And since we're all aware of that fact, no one will rat out anyone, and we'll be free in a matter of minutes.
It was all Dilbert. I told him not to chop the body up, but he insisted. He said that's how he gets rid of all his victims. Oh, hi, Dilbert. Alice. He has always been evil. I felt it. But I never knew how evil until he would not stop plunging that fork into Todd's body. I stopped counting at 100. Oh, God. Hello, Dilbert. Ashok! May I have that ice cream sandwich you promised me now?
So the video makes light of it, but it's essentially this: you're put into a context where you're not sure what other people are going to decide. So what happens in that context? So the prisoner's dilemma task, as when it's done experimentally, is you have a situation where you can get a payoff. We're not really talking about, confessing to crimes here, but a payoff depends on the choices of both people in the situation. If both you and your friend choose one option, you both get $3. If you choose a second option and your friend chooses the first option, you get $6 and your friend loses $6. So you're in the classic prisoner's dilemma context, where if you focus just on your individual win, you're going to want to choose one option. Whereas if you want both of you to benefit, you're going to choose the other option. Now, people are most likely to be cooperative if they are in fact playing with someone they know and they care about. Because if you cheat your friend and they lose $6, they're going to be mad at you. That's a problem. And also, if they expect to interact with even a stranger in the future, like if they're going to be partnered possibly with them again, they're more likely to adopt the cooperative strategy where they personally win less money, but they are preserving the relationship with the person they're playing with. So, just remind yourself of what these options might look like. You can do that by looking at graphs like this. I found this one on Google Images, but it just lays it out, and it points out the importance of the relational component. If people are playing this game with a stranger, and they don't expect to have any future interaction, they are much more likely to be competitive, meaning they're going to take an option where they expect to have a higher payoff and to punish the other person. When we want to increase cooperation, there are certain things that you can do. So if you manipulate, and I've always found this fascinating, if you call it, they're not going to call it the prisoner's dilemma game. They call it the Wall Street game. That kind of sends a message of competition, that winners are the best people and losers are losers. If you change the name and give it a more communal theme, like calling it the community game, the cooperative approach is chosen far more often, because what you're doing is changing the norms in the game. You can also encourage cooperation by encouraging people to cooperate first. So saying, I'm going to cooperate now, and I expect you to cooperate in return. So when we encourage this kind of tit-for-tat kind of scorekeeping, it actually can move people into a more cooperative direction over time. Now, the prisoner's dilemma decision-making can also be influenced by whether or not people are talking, and the degree to which there are, like, betrayals. So in this image, and again, I found this on Google Images, if you are silent and you cooperate, you can keep, and your partner is silent and also cooperates, then you're going to serve less time. And this was a traditional prisoner's dilemma situation. But if you have betrayal and defection, then you can protect yourself, and so on. And then the final condition, you could have both who tell on the other one, and they'll both end up getting a longer punishment than if they both stayed quiet. So these sort of manipulations, if you can change the norms for what you're doing, and I've seen this happen in interrogations sometimes, if you shift the context to a more community-based, more communal kind of context, you can actually move people in a more cooperative direction. Not really in, that's not something that's been done empirically, in the context of interrogating people. But more often where we see this is in situations where you need people to be cooperative to get something done. If you can put them in a context where they are seeing the fruits of cooperation, then they tend to move in the direction of making sure everybody gets a little piece of the pie, as opposed to taking the more selfish approach to protecting your own interests at the cost of everyone else. Now, another kind of dilemma is something called a resource dilemma. And the first one of these that I learned about when I was a student was something called the tragedy of the commons. So, and this actually happens in agricultural spaces all over the world, where you have common land that's shared. And if you put too much livestock on that common land, you can actually destroy it. So the individual farmers they say, in order for me to profit, I have to have this number of sheep or cows or whatever. And if they move in that direction and say, my personal success is more important than preserving the grassland, then everybody loses. So once you destroy the grassland with all of your sheep, nobody is successful. So the tragedy of the commons has meant, and there have been historical events like this, where entire communities starve because the land has been destroyed by the self-focus of the particular individuals using that common land or that common resource. Resource dilemmas usually involve limited resources that are finite. I've heard a lot of conversation over the last few decades about water usage in the West, and how this is a real tragedy of the commons situation, where you have multiple states fighting over water rights to big rivers like the Colorado River, which, there's a significant risk if we allow one state to use tons of water for agriculture and for big cities, then the downstream states are going to suffer from a loss of water and access to said water. And that's a real classic kind of resource dilemma. One form of resource dilemma also is when the people who have access to the resource use it up too fast. And that's happened with water usage. And, if there's an ecological downturn, like if there's a big drought, then people are in have a big problem. Another situation that's prone to resource dilemmas is when not enough people are contributing to a resource that can be rebuilt. Now, you could talk about this in terms of tax dollars, for example. If you have a public school system that relies on tax dollars and people are not contributing their share, then the school system suffers, and so does the whole community. So that's another example. Now, a final area of research, I think it's final, is what do we know about using threats? We're certainly in a political climate where it's believed that threats are the only way to resolve conflict. So I think it's interesting to explore the research in this area. Like a lot of this research, it comes out of the field of behavioral economics, which is a mixture of the study of business and economics and social psychology. So in the classic research was by Deutsch and Krauss, they set up a game situation, and what they found was that, lobbing threats is not particularly effective in reducing conflict. It can actually make conflicts worse and drive down profits in businesses. What they did was, they set up a game playing situation, and they had 2 participants at a time, and they were told, you are in charge of a trucking company. So this is the classic graphic of it. You're told, your company A or your partner is company B. You have one route that's super fast, but only one truck can be on it at a time. The other route is super long and windy and expensive. So if, let's say you're with company A, if you're focused on only your success, you're going to want to take the short route. And you may actually think, I need to block my opponent here, company B, and prevent them from taking part of my share of the profits. So you are competitors. You are people in the same business competing for the same clients. And you may say to yourself, I'm in a competition with company B. I could block them. Company B has its own gate. They could block me. So, company A starts up here and they have control of the A gate. Company B starts down here and they have control of the B gate, which sets up a situation where you can punish your opponent in order to preserve the possibility that you can win. That means company A, if I'm company A, I can threaten to lock the gate and prevent company B from using the short route to get to their finish line. The same goes for company B. They can threaten to close the B gate and prevent me in company A from getting to my finish line quickly. So you have a choice. Do I avoid the conflict entirely and take the long route? Probably you're not going to want to do that because you're going to deplete your profits. So you want to be able to use the short route. Now, you could either engage in mutually destructive warfare here, lock all the gates, and force both of you to take the long road, or you could engage in cooperation and say, I'm going to open my gate to you, you go first, and then you're going to open your gate to me, and I'll go second, and back and forth, that kind of tit-for-tat strategy. When we look at the classic findings, what you see is that the use of threats is pretty much universally bad for profits. I mean, it slightly differs, based on whether you've got, the no threat condition, they make a profit. When there's no communication, so you're not negotiating, you're just making decisions, and you're not using threats, that's when you get the best profits. It goes down when you have voluntary communication, because what people tend to do is lob some soft threats. If they're required to talk to each other, they lose some money because they tend to sort of communicate threats along the way. If you have unilateral threats, so you have one player who's told threaten the other side, but the other company subject is not going to do that, then you're going to have losses. You're going to lose money under the conditions, even when there's no threat. When there's no communication going on, you're still going to lose money. But you're going to lose the most when people are engaged in bilateral threats and they're not communicating effectively. So you lock the gate. You say nothing, but you lock the gate. And basically what you're saying to your opponent is, screw you, I'm locking the gate. You can't get through. You have to go the long way. That's a kind of threat, even though you're not saying it. You get similar patterns of findings when you have voluntary and required communications. And communication doesn't fix it, because what some people had argued was, if you just let people talk to each other, they'll negotiate and they'll find a mutually profitable solution. Nope. Really not. So the two sides, when they're not allowed to communicate with each other, would they have worked out their differences and talked it over? Deutsch and Krauss actually did a version of the study where participants were required to communicate through the intercom on every trial. And unfortunately, requiring people to communicate did not raise profits. The problem with the communication was that people actually used the opportunity to threaten each other instead of actually saying, hey, if we just go back and forth, we'll both profit more. How about we do that? Instead, they were like, hey, you don't stop this, I'm going to lock the gate on you. So they if they wanted them to actually come up with a solution that was fair, that was kind of not moving in the direction that people would naturally move in. If people, though, were focused on, and they were specifically instructed to work out a fair and equitable solution, then they tended to avoid threats and things got better with time. There has been a great deal of research on negotiation. Now, some of this research is another one of those mixing different disciplines. A lot of what we know about negotiation and bargaining comes from two sources, the world of business and the world of political science. So, there's a lot of negotiating that goes on, and as a result, there's been a lot of research on what kind of negotiation tactics are actually effective. A form of communication between opposing sides in conflict where you have offers and counteroffers, that's what we mean by negotiation. And eventually the parties are going to agree to the rules. A version of this is to work toward what's called an integrative solution. So you have a conflict between parties and you need to make some trade-offs on issues. So, in the water situation in the West, for example, California farmers, and I wouldn't say these are family farms, these are big industrial farms, they're going to have to do some trading off. They're going to have to cut some of their water usage to benefit others downstream on the Colorado. And those trade-offs are going to need to be mutually beneficial. If each side concedes on some of the most of the issues that are related, but the ones that are the least important, that can tend to build some goodwill. People tend to find it really, really hard, though, to find these integrative solutions. So, just to clarify, if you're looking for an integrative solution, you get people to do some of the issues that are related to their different interests, and you get each side to concede on issues that are relatively low stakes. And that can clear the decks. It creates a sense of, hey, we're actually making some progress here. We're dealing with the issues that are less critical. See, we can negotiate. And then that opens the conversation up to working out the more difficult, important issues on each side. Successful negotiation and bargaining relies on a number of things, certainly that are beyond the scope of this class. We could do an entire semester just on negotiation and bargaining, and I think I'll let my friends over in poli-sci deal with that. When you're negotiating with someone, keep in mind that you can pursue integrative solutions that really push you to gain trust with the other side and actually learn about them and their own interests. Understanding the other side's interests, understanding who they are, what they need, what they want, can help you to contextualize your own interests and allows you to share your side of situations in a more open way when that trust is gained. When you are thinking about the situation in an integrative manner, that can help you to think of it from the point of view of the opposition that you're facing and reconstrue the situation such that you can seek solutions that are more appropriate to the needs of both sides. We tend not to want to do that. Especially in American culture, we tend to see any situation where negotiation and bargaining is happening as a zero-sum game. I either win or I lose. Successful negotiation isn't black and white like that. It involves really trying to understand your own position and understand your opponent's position so that you are de-emphasizing the win-loss image of negotiation and instead working on the best interests of everyone involved. Unfortunately, that tends not to be the way we think about negotiation. We tend to think of it in win-lose terms, and that can kind of blind us to the value of integrative solutions. And that concludes my coverage of Chapter 9.